gonna hit record.
Tell me like when we're live.
Okay.
I'm not sure when we're live.
Okay. Three, two, one. Wait, no, don't. No, don't say. I'm just gonna make sure
Yeah, I can
everything is.
put it up. Hold up.
Mm, okay, we are live now.
We are?
Yep.
Okay, we are live. So hey everyone, welcome to the third episode of the MYMI MedTech webinar series. I hope you're all doing well so far. My name is Colin and I'll be your host for today. And behind the scenes, we have Mihin moderating our discussion. For today's episode, we are joined by our very own Miami mentor, Dr. Andrew Rodda. So hi, Andrew. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, Colin. Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Just been having a chat with these two behind the scenes beforehand, so that's smoothed things over and made me relax a little bit. So that's been good.
That's great. It's made me a lot more calm as well. I'm really excited to dive into some of our topics today. So before we start off, I guess for those who don't know you, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Well, so my name's Andrew Rodda. I'm an academic at Monash University. My connection to the MYMI team is I mentor the team. Essentially, I keep an eye on everything they do and make sure they don't break too many rules along the way. My position is I'm part of the Department of Materials Science and Engineering. So I'm a biomedical engineer in the materials field, and I work a lot with materials that interface with cells and proteins and DNA and lots of biomedical molecules and things like that.
Awesome. That sounds good. So I'd like to thank you again one more time for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here and joining us on our webinar. So we're going to kick off with our first question today. And that question is, what inspired you to develop technologies for the biomedical applications?
I guess I really started out in biomedical engineering. I think probably the same way that about half of the people who end up in this field do, is I wanted to make robotic arms. That was when I was a teenager, that was the big thing, was all of the future technologies that we were going to be able to hook into ourselves and make our lives easier if we had problems. That was kind of where I started, and I grew up with a lot of reading a lot of the old sci-fi novels, so things like Robert Heinlein and Asimov and some of that really old classic sci-fi. And it was really kind of a lot of the inspiration to get into that field came from those books and those stories of what you can do or what you could potentially do with technology to make people different. And it was it was interesting always to go back and say, okay, well, there's these technologies here, but what really comes down to is how it changes the human story behind it. What you can do with the technology is only interesting in the way that it changes what people do.
Yeah, that's very true. It's really well said. So over the years, I'm sure you've done like a lot of cool research looking into like this type of technologies and biomed tech. So like what are some of the cool things you've like worked on over the years?
Well, my major, the work that I mostly do is all around looking at what's called synthetic cell microenvironments. So these are materials that basically that cells like to grow in.
Okay.
You create a material, and you can modify the surface or modify some of the other properties of the material so that the cells will stick down nicely. They'll attach themselves to the surface, and they'll be able to grow and develop and turn themselves into the types of cells that you want them to be, and create new tissue and basically, try and turn cells into something that's actually functional. So that's kind of the background area that I've worked in for a few years now. It's an area called tissue engineering. If you want to go and look up kind of some of the other things that are going on, there's some really interesting stuff there about growing organs in a chip for doing drug testing or things like that. That's nothing that I've been involved with, but that's one of the kind of the coolest new areas in the field. There's things like creating materials that can integrate into your body really well. So if you've got an artificial limb or something like that, being able to actually stick it in your body, not have your immune system reject it, have the cells actually grow into the material and interface and basically make it a part of your body as much as it can be. That's really where the fun stuff is happening these days, is things that can be integrated well into your body, particularly in the long term, is one of the real big challenges at the moment.
How come? Why would you say that, like, in the long term?
Well, so it's easy enough, I guess, to put any old material in your body for a very short time, but if you want to leave it there for a very long time, there are a lot of kind of degenerative things that happen over long periods of time that then start to make certain materials incompatible with your body. So some materials will wear down and they'll release different byproducts into your bloodstream, and that can be an issue. Some of the materials, as part of their function, they may cause small amounts of damage to the cells that are around them. So if it's only in there for a short time, then it's not such a big issue. You have very small amounts of damage, they're not really noticeable. But if they're in there for kind of years or decades in some cases, then very small things add up to a lot over time.
Oh, wow! I never actually really thought about it that way. That's really cool.
Well, if you think you've got someone's artificial hip or something like that, again, this is not really my area, but that's going to be in someone's body for 20 years. Ideally,
for sure.
We'd like to make it longer, but at the moment, most artificial hips have to be taken out and replaced. Because they just eventually the bone around them ends up loosening, and you have to go in and replace them.
That's something really important, I guess, we need to consider when we're designing medical technology nowadays, and something that's quite overlooked in some parts. Was there like a particular reason why you chose to specifically look at the way the cells interact with my materials? Or
not really. I kind of fell into the area a little bit. So I started out at university doing a mechatronics degree, which is quite a long way from where I am now. And kind of halfway through that course, I got the opportunity to do a summer project.
Really?
With the guy who eventually became my PhD supervisor. And so he was from materials, and he was offering this project as a kind of a side thing, side project for his research lab. and it seemed really interesting to me, and so I took that on over the 12 weeks and had a really good time. Worked really hard and learned a lot. And after the project ended, he kind of said, "Okay, well, do you want to keep on doing some work with me?" And I just kind of worked with him for another, I think it was about a year and a half.
Oh wow!
Afterwards, before I finished my undergrad, and then went on, and he offered me to do a PhD with him. So
Oh wow! So
yeah, it was really just a matter of I kind of fell into the area and learned to appreciate why it was so much better than what I was doing before. Like I was saying before, a lot of people start out with robotic arms, but robotic arms are not the be all and end all of biomedical engineering. There's a lot of other, things going on that are really, really interesting, but they're just not quite so, easy to sell to everyone. Everyone looks at the sci-fi novels and goes, "Yeah, robots, yeah, they're amazing." But there's a certain there's a lot of interest in the subtlety of some of the things that are in other fields. So I find in materials a lot of the time, instead of doing things from the top down, designing every little part of a system, a lot of the time what we're doing is we're creating the right conditions and allowing things to just kind of organize themselves. And to me, there's that's a really interesting and a really powerful way of doing things, is that kind of bottom up organization.
Awesome. That sounds really interesting, Andrew. So that sounds like some real good work, and it seems like it's good. It's kind of encouraging to know, like as an undergraduate, that you were able to find what you really wanted to do and were passionate about during your undergraduate study, and had the opportunity to like change when you head into like postgraduate. So it's like not set in stone and it's probably really good for like most undergraduates to hear something like that. It's really encouraging.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think, you certainly, you don't have to feel like, when you're a student that you've already made all the choices for your career. You've got a long career coming up ahead of you. And, as long as you stay curious, and as long as you keep your eye out for some of the interesting things that are going on. And if you find something interesting, look into it, because sometimes that might be the next thing that really sparks your interest.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I guess we can move on to our second question. Thanks for answering that first question really well. So why did you decide to get involved with MYMI?
Self-interest.
Self-interest?
That's a little glib. I'll expand on that a little bit.
Yeah.
So I guess so I did my degree coming through Monash. I left for a little while after I finished my PhD, and then came back as a member of staff.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was really aware of is that there wasn't really something that there wasn't any group that kind of brought together all of the medical engineering people who are interested in that kind of area.
Yeah.
There were clubs and societies for mechanical and for civil engineering and for chemical engineering, but there was never really anything for medical engineering. And there was biomed groups and there was medical groups, but again, not really for engineers.
Yeah.
And this, it had kind of bugged me as a student, but as a staff member, as a junior staff member in particular, it kind of bugged me even more, because when you're working somewhere, it's just super important to have people around you and mentors that you can go and pick their brains all the time.
Yeah.
And find out and benefit from the wisdom that they've built up over a lot of years. And so it was kind of something that started getting set up just because we wanted to have a group for people like me.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to have a group around me of all the other people who were interested in the things that I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it kind of half got started with some other postgraduates. And then Darren and Santiago came to me, what was it? It's about 18 months ago now, and said, you know, hey, we'd really like to start something like this. You know, are you interested? And I was basically, you know, straight on board because it was already something that I really, really wanted to do for myself, was to have this community around and to have the people around that I can, you know, bounce my ideas off and you know, have that support around you to help you build yourself up. So yeah, it was really just something that I could see that was missing from my own career development, and was then, you know, obviously missing for everyone else as well. So it was kind of a no-brainer, really.
An easy decision to make.
Yeah, very.
Oh, that's awesome. And we really appreciate you, on behalf of MYMI, you helping us and mentoring us along the way. So thank you from all of us.
Oh, look, it's an absolute pleasure. You know, you guys are very easy to work with. It, you know, compared to some of the other things I have to do, you know, this is probably one of the more fun things that I get to do in my job. So more fun and more meaningful as well, because, you know, I really do feel like you guys are developing a lot of skills and a lot of the community that's going to put you all in good stead in a long way into the future.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really good to hear. Okay, so we will move on to our next question, and this is something we kind of like touched on just earlier. So so we can go more in depth, I guess. So what are your thoughts on the importance of materials in designing biomedical and medical technologies?
Yeah, interesting one. I mean, materials are important everywhere, really. You know, if you know, and I'm going to go into my first year lecturer mode here, but, you know, if you choose the wrong material to make your thing out of, your thing's not going to work.
Yeah.
You know, if you try and build an airplane out of steel, the airplane's not going to fly. It's going to be too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
If you try and build a prosthetic leg out of, you know, regular carbon steel, again, you know, it's going to corrode because you're sticking it in what is basically a saltwater environment. You're going to have rusty steel going through your body. That's not going to be much good. So, you know, in some ways it's kind of obvious what the importance of materials are. If they're not the right materials, everything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Having said that, you know, there's then the other side of the coin, which is, you know, you can have materials where nothing goes wrong, but then you might want materials that actually start making things go right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, part of the work that I do is in materials that are actually, you know, meant to be bioactive, that are meant to push cells and push your cells into developing or reacting in a particular way. Mm-hmm. And actually not just be, you know, an inert material that your body ignores, you know, not just getting rid of the foreign body response, but actually turning that, you know, medical device or whatever it happens to be into something that is having a beneficial effect on your body. So I think that's one of the kind of the interesting things that's coming out of my area at the moment is, you know, it's starting to turn away from just trying to make materials as harm-free as they can be, to actually looking and going, okay, well, we're starting to understand a little bit more about how cells actually respond to these materials. maybe we can develop something that they actively like.
Oh, I've never considered it like that. So I guess like with these types of materials, what are you normally like looking for? Like what are these like normally making materials made out of are we talking about?
So, well, I guess it depends very much on the application. So you're going to use a very different material for, a drug delivery vehicle to, what you use for a prosthetic leg, for example.
Yeah.
My particular field is mostly based around polymers. So relatively soft materials should be able to interface with your cells without too many, big issues.
Okay.
And that kind of includes things like, proteins and peptides and, bioactive polymers.
Okay.
Natural polymers.
Yeah. So what are some examples of the applications we could use this, like I guess more specifically, like where in our body might we see these materials being implanted?
Well, my particular work wasn't
Yeah.
really based around any particular part of your body. Mine was very
Okay.
much just, what do cells in general
Okay.
interact with. But, if you can think of something that's going to be implanted into your body, then, there's going to be cells around it. So, you could go from anything from, say, a neural implant, so something that gets put into someone's brain to actually, either to stimulate the nerves or to respond to the nerves.
Yeah.
You can have, we've already talked about, hip implants and joints and things like that. Artificial pacemakers, things like that. All of them are going to interact with your cells at some point. You can't really just have it kind of floating in your body in a void there and, have a vat of liquid around it. There's going to be cells that are going to interact with the surface.
Yeah.
So it's really pretty much anything that goes into your body is going to have some consideration of how a cell is going to interact with it.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. So just a quick thought then, like what are some things that are considered like normally overlooked when we're designing a material that could be like implanted in our body? What's something that most people wouldn't think of, but it's like a vital or important?
Yeah. I guess the one I see professionally most of the time, the thing that's overlooked by a lot of people, even people that are maybe not in my area, but in related areas, is just that as soon as you put anything in your body, it's going to get coated in this layer of proteins and other molecules.
Okay.
So it's part of the foreign body response. Of your body. You put a piece of anything in there, and you get a couple of nanometers thick layer of a whole range of different proteins. It's not always the same proteins. Depending on what the material is, different proteins might stick down more or less. But having this this protein surface all over your materials, a lot of people think, we're going to make our material and we're going to put this surface coating on it and it's going to have all of this, fancy stuff on it. And then, if you actually took that through and you went and tested it, well, anything that you've got on the surface of the material, it's just going to get covered over.
Oh.
So you just end up with, the cells are not going to be able to see whatever's actually at the surface of your material because there's a whole heap of just protein rubbish that's just stuck all over it.
Okay. That's interesting. Thanks for telling us about that.
Well, it's Yeah, I should be clear. It's probably not rubbish, but it's this. It's the stuff that is part of your body and is the body's first defense against foreign objects.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Awesome. So now I guess we're going to be like approaching you from more of like a lecturer as a lecturer at Monash. So do you have a personal philosophy around teaching and like creating assessments and tasks for students?
Oh, that would be giving the game away, wouldn't it?
Perhaps. But I guess, yeah.
I guess I'm allowed to give hints to people that tune into MYMI seminars. I think that's fair enough, isn't it?
I guess that's fair.
But personal philosophy, I guess really what I like people to get involved with in the classes and in the assignments that I try and set is a lot of it is around appreciating all of the complexity that's around us in the world.
Okay.
So, there's one way of writing an assignment where, you've got, here is the question and you follow the set sequence of steps through and you get to the answer and it's the right answer and yay, well done, you got the answer. And I don't know, I find it really hard to see how that's beneficial to students once they get out in the real world, because once you're actually out there and doing things, any question that you're trying to answer probably hasn't got an answer already.
Yeah.
And so, there's not going to be a set way that you can approach this question. There's going to be probably some ways that you're going to try first because they've worked on other questions that are similar. But, one of the things is that students really have to start being comfortable with, okay, this question doesn't necessarily have a right answer.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Once you start with that, then you start looking at, okay, well, if the question doesn't have a right answer, then what makes your answer better than my answer? And that's really coming back to how well you justify how you got to your answer. So looking at, how thorough your method is and how well you've actually gone about constructing an argument to say, yeah, this is the best answer that we can get.
Yeah.
Rather than just, this is the right answer because it matches the one that's in the answer sheet.
Okay. So you like to challenge the students more to like think how to like approach a question, I guess, or a problem without being like a guidance, because that's like not how the real world is like.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, it's a lot of engineering just really comes down to practicing, and doing things over and over again until they seem like second nature. And it's something that in some cases I feel like students haven't been able to practice dealing with open questions as much as they really should have, because like I said, once you get out there, every question is an open question. There are no correct answers in the real world. There's just more right and more wrong answers. Okay.
Do you have like, I guess, any advice to help like for students to training them to like develop abilities to be have a more open-ended mindset, I guess, tackling problems? Is there any like?
I think advice? Mostly it comes back to just trying to actually break your own logic down. So being your own, worst critic, and looking at your answer and going, is that actually the best answer? Can I make that a better answer?
Okay.
What does this answer look like to someone who's looking at it from the outside? If you're asking those kind of questions, I think that probably, that puts you on the right pathway at least.
Okay. That's nice. So I guess this is like a hypothetical question, or perhaps maybe will come true. But if you had like the power to like change the way like engineering or subject is taught at the university, how would you change it to like follow your beliefs and philosophy of teaching?
Um, I'm going to turn that around a little bit, actually.
Okay.
I don't think it should follow my beliefs. Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that I have really come to appreciate is that there are, you know, a whole heap of different views on how the world does and should work.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't, you know, I can teach my system, and my system will be good for some situations. But I think really the most important bit is that you get exposed to a diversity of views about how you go about answering questions. And the
Okay.
more different tools that you've got in your toolbox then, and the more different approaches that you can take to solving a problem, and the more different experiences that you've got, the better off you're going to be. I think,
Yeah.
you know, the worst thing I could possibly do was to turn the whole course into my own personal philosophical way of teaching materials engineering. I think that would be a terrible thing to do, because, you know, there's a lot of people out there who are also very experienced and know a lot about their particular subjects, and they will teach it in a different way, and that's also a valid way of going about it.
Yeah. Okay. That's really well answered. A really good answer to your question. Okay, thanks for that. So I guess now, like leading to our final question that we prepared for you is, what advice do you have for students now in the biomed and like engineering subject who are interested in developing medical technologies? Like, what advice would you give to someone?
I think I'll start with the easy ones, which is you need to start learning about some of the what we would probably call the more advanced topics,
Okay.
as early as you possibly can. So things like medical technology regulation, we don't really cover it in any of undergraduate courses. You know, it gets covered a little bit in maybe a postgraduate course.
Yeah.
But the more you can learn about how regulation works, the better off you're going to be, because you know, it really does underpin so much of how you can go about designing things. So I mean, if you're starting to design something, you've got to know first of all what your restrictions are. You know, you can't do it this way because of this restriction, you can't do it this way because of this restriction. And the regulations, you know, really are a framework for developing things that can be eventually released. If it's not going to be able to be, you know, if the risks of the device are not going to be able to be managed effectively, then you're just not going to go anywhere. And the other topic that's kind of in those advanced topics as well is the business side of things.
Okay.
You know, I came through all my degrees, and, you know, I did the, you know, the obligatory professional practice unit, and, you know, sat there and learned how to read a balance sheet, and it was all pretty, you know, pretty boring, to be honest. But once you actually start getting into, you know, hey, I've got this idea, and how could we actually go and make it? You've really got to engage with the business side, because, you know, at some point you've got to pay money to get your thing made. That means you've got to make money, which means someone's got to pay you money, which means, you know, there's a whole heap of, you know, different human to human conversations that have to happen there to make all of those things happen. So that, I guess that's probably, there's a few topics that you really have to get your head around as early as possible, and they're not necessarily the things that are covered in your course. I guess the more general thing that I'd add is don't pigeonhole yourself. Don't just kind of say, okay, well, I'm an electrical engineer, or I'm a chemical engineer, and this is what I do, and I'm not going to, stray outside my little area. If you want to actually go out and do something in the real world, it's very hard to do that and just be a technical person.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be interested not just in, the business and regulatory and those kinds of things, but then you've got to be interested in, kind of the whole human side of things. What makes people, like one device over another? Why, you get into topics like bioethics and things like that of, should we be putting this technology out there?
Yeah.
I think, probably the worst thing you could do is just say, I just make technology. I don't worry about who uses it or how they use it or anything like that. I think you've got to really be interested in the whole spectrum of things that are going on there.
Oh, wow. Never actually thought about that, really.
Well, it kind of comes back to, we were talking earlier in teaching about complexity and having open problems, and it's really kind of the same thing in a lot of ways, is that there's always different points of view of how something should work or how something could work, and what you make for one person is not going to work for another person, and you really just have to keep learning all of these different areas to give yourself the best chance of doing something that's going to have the most impact.
Okay. Wow. Food for thought, I guess, for all of our students who want to build onto this community. So I guess like one more question as part of this is like, for students who are studying now, what should we be doing to make the most of our opportunities we have? Like
at university?
Yeah, like for like any student, I guess, who's like doing research or chasing their degree in like engineering or science, how should we be making the most of all of our experiences, all the opportunities we gain?
Look, the most important thing is, try and get involved in something that is that is leading you on the pathway to where you want to be. And whether that's, getting involved with MYMI if you want to get into medical technology, or, if it's, going out there and getting a part-time job in a company that, is doing things that you find really interesting, it really just is a matter of you've got to go out there and just continually do something. It doesn't really matter in particular what you do, as long as it's kind of leading you somewhere towards something that you'd like to be going and doing. If you're learning along the way, if you're picking up new skills that you can see are going to be useful to you in future, if you're meeting people that have interesting and different views to your own, and that's all going to put you in good stead for the future.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering those. Those were some really well and like good responses to our questions. So now we're going to move on to some of the live questions that we had in our audience, and I'll pass it on to Mahin.
Hey, Andrew. How are you going? It's been really amazing to be sitting just behind the scenes, listening to everything that you've had to say. So the first question we had come through, it's quite a chonker. But the gist of it is
Tom?
the importance of teaching materials explicitly to students in biomedical and medical, like how do you the importance of teaching materials to biomedical and medical students. And I know we talked about this a bit before, how in the past materials has always been a bit of a, not an afterthought, but an implied school of thought for other engineers. And it's only recently that materials engineering has become very it's coalesced into an explicit discipline. How do you feel about that in relation specifically to medical and biomedical fields and engineering?
Oh, there's a tough question. I'm going to have to make something up off the top of my head for that. That's a really interesting question. I mean, part of it, if you're thinking about it from, you've got people who are in other disciplines who, either in other fields of engineering or in, let's say they're coming from a medical background or a design background, for example. Having a little bit of materials knowledge is going to be so much more beneficial than having a lot more of the knowledge in their specific area. A little bit of breadth goes a long, long way in a field like biomedical engineering. So if you've just got even just an awareness of what is, in these other fields that are around you, and let's say a couple of people that work in those fields as well that you can go and have a chat to if you've got a particular question about whatever it happens to be, you're gonna be so much better off in that situation than if you've just stuck very narrowly into your one little field. It's in a field like medical engineering, it's really important to just have that breadth in there because it is an interdisciplinary field. And as much as you can be a specialist in one little area, if you can't reach out and work with other people, if you can't, pick their brains on a topic that you don't know very much about, if you don't know what else is around you that's, next to your area, if we're mapping out all of the different areas of biomedical engineering, I mean, that would take days, but let's say that we've done it and we've put it all in a map of all the ones that are close to each other or kind of next to each other. And if you've just stuck within your little circle, number one, you're not going to get anywhere because you don't know what's out there. And number two, no one's going to come and work with you either because they don't know you're there either.
Right. Okay.
So
that's really good actually, because that ties in quite neatly actually into our next live question, which was actually on your thoughts about having biomedical engineering as a separate, as its own stream, as opposed to having it as a part of a double degree. Because I know, as you've just said, there has to be a focus on interdisciplinary knowledge. Do you think having a degree for Biomed Eng is going to be sufficient for that, or is the current pathway where we have double degrees with electives more suitable for something like, as you've said, the need to be have the breadth, as you said?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I mean, there's different universities that are approaching this in very, very different ways. Again, I think it really comes back to diversity in a lot of ways. You can be a materials engineer who knows a lot about the biomedical side of things. You can be a medical practitioner who knows a little bit about materials. You can be a medical engineer who knows a little bit out on either side. They're all kind of different positions on a spectrum. And to be honest, I feel like there's use for all of those positions. And you don't really want to have all of one version. You want to have people with all of those different skill sets going around, because again, the more different viewpoints you've got, the more likely you are to be able to converge on something that is actually going to be a good solution in practice.
Right, yeah. I just had a follow-up question to that, actually. So earlier in the webinar, we learned about your own uni experience and how you jumped between different streams, and how in reality it's the fact that your course is not dictated from day one or a week. Is that the same in the professional field? Is it possible to change streams? If I go in as an electrical engineer personally, can I 10 years down the track suddenly go, maybe I have an interest in materials? Is it more difficult professionally than it is academically?
I mean, it certainly happens. Maybe not in that particular way, but one thing that you will certainly be able to see in the statistics is how many people transition out of being technical engineers and transition into business roles.
Oh yeah, I have seen that actually. My own father's an
engineer. A lot of engineers end up running businesses and doing that side of things, because yes, they've got the technical knowledge, but they've also got a lot of kind of core soft skills that that they can make useful in a way that people who have done a business degree, say, and nothing against a business degree, but it's a I know you're a commerce student as well, Mihin, so I won't go there.
Definition, yeah. No, that's okay. Go.
But you'll see things in different ways, and a lot of companies find it really useful to have engineers, or people with other technical backgrounds helping to run the company. And so as you progress throughout your career, this is why we have continuous professional development as part of your degree. It's not because it's something that you should only be doing as part of your degree. It's something that you should just be doing. Think of it as in the most nice way possible. This is like this is how you train your dog. It's just repetition. You do continuous professional development this year and next year and next year and next year, and then hopefully once you're out of university, hopefully you keep doing it.
Hopefully, yeah. Complete with the dog treats as well.
Look,
something to keep me going.
That's what the paycheck's for, isn't it? You got to be able to feed yourself.
Yeah, that's true. In this economy, absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of the lives questions, that was it. I personally found that very insightful. So thank you for
so
that.
did I.
I'll pass it back to Carlin now just to wrap things up for us. So once again, thank you from behind the scenes.
Okay. Thanks, Mihin. And so that concludes our live Q&A section of the live stream, which brings us to the end of today's webinar episode. So thank you again so much for joining us today, Andrew. It was really great to have a talk with you about your experience and your thoughts. And yeah, we really appreciate it. And to the audience, I guess, we hope you all enjoyed today's webinar episode, and you should go and stay tuned for upcoming episodes and other MYMI events in the future by following us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and consider subscribing to our mailing list. It's full of good stuff. So thank you once again, Andrew, and we all hope you have a good evening. So see you later.
Cool. That's it.
That's it.
Excellent.